You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Shoe In Show. Thanks for joining us this week. Matt, the naughty have never had it so nice. The naughty have never had it so easy in this world. Why? Because coal prices are too high and supply chains are too messed up.
Way messed up.
Coal into stockings this year. So the naughty aren't getting coal.
Nope.
The nice may not be getting anything either. We don't know.
No. Back ordered for the nice, right?
Yeah. Well, we hope you're nice. But if you're naughty, we're glad you're here too. This is the Shoe and Show podcast on all things footwear. And obviously, when we're talking about footwear manufacturing and supply chains, 95% of all footwear emanate from Asia, from China, Vietnam, and Indonesia. In particular, China is still the juggernaut, even with the Trump tariffs, even with all the challenges that are happening. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today is where that relationship is headed and how that's going to impact our industry over the next several years. So we're talking about naughty and we're talking about China. I think we got to have this one guest on to really kind of bring it to life, right?
We do. And so I'm super excited to have Frank Lavin on, who is the chairman and founder of Export Now. Frank has also been ambassador to Singapore. He was undersecretary of international trade at the Commerce Department, where he was one of my 15 bosses in a very, very flat organization, and has been a longtime friend of mine. And so, Frank, welcome to Shoe and Show. The reason we wanted you on is that you wrote in Forbes just this past week. We'll post it in the notes for this episode. But you wrote in Forbes about what U.S.-China decoupling looks like. And so I want to start the conversation there. What is this decoupling thing? We've heard it bantied about, as you noted in your piece, amongst a lot of different outlets. What are we talking about with decoupling? And let's deconstruct the decoupling notion, if you will, and see where we stand with China.
Sure. Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Andy. Thank you for having me back on. I think we did one of these chats a few years back, but Matt, it's great to reconnect. Andy, good to see you again, and very happy to talk Asia, talk China, talk decoupling. But decoupling is kind of an umbrella term, meaning there's not an explicit trade term, but it really means, can we do less? Can we unwind some of the economic and trade relationships we have? And won't we be better off if we do that? And it's usually articulated with regard to China, that there's so much ill will, if I may say so, in the U.S.-China relationship. It's perhaps at the lowest point it's been in the modern era, meaning since Nixon and Kissinger reinitiated the formal relationships 50 some years ago. But it's really been on a downward slide for a few years. And it does prompt then a general question. If there is nothing but ill will there, if it's not a positive relationship, shouldn't we, either government directed or businesses at their own volition, shouldn't we find better economic relationships or better trading relationships with which to do business?
All right. So with that in mind, you said it's the worst it's been in 50 years. I think you argue in the piece, though, that decoupling is a little bit too dramatic, I guess, for how to describe what's currently happening. You speak to a rebalancing. And so I often think about, like, something doesn't feel right now with the relationship with China. Okay. When you look at here in D.C., where we're located, you see that the one bipartisan issue is anti-China, right? You have a forced labor bill with Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz on it as sponsors. It tells you everything you need to know about the relationship with China right now. It's fraught. But is it really a decoupling? What leads you to believe it's not?
That's the twist in the plot, that there's a fair amount of negative messaging. There are serious trade issues, no doubt. There are geopolitical issues, as you know. There are human rights issues. So there's several families of issues, problems between the two nations. That then you put on top of that Trump's tariffs, which depress trade. You put on top of that COVID-related issues, supply chain issues, and you say, boy, that's a lot of downward pressure. That's sort of the bad news, if you will, in the economic relationship. And then you look at the numbers and you say, guess what? U.S. exports to China went up this year, went up measurably this year, and China exports to the U.S. went up this year, went up measurably this year, even with all of this bad news. So you're saying, wow, even with this sort of negative atmosphere and sort of the CNN effect of everybody sort of unhappy, there's still significant economic value in the relationship that the Chinese businesses find China increasingly a better market where they can sell their goods. And they also see China as a good locale from where they can source their goods. So there's a fair amount of activity, and that activity has actually picked up even in this year of decoupling and bad rhetoric and so forth.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to point out, is that I feel like there's a decoupling between the government and between business on how we're looking at China, right? The government's looking at it in a completely different light than business is, and business obviously is looking for opportunities, marketplace access, sourcing location, and they're trying to navigate how they deal with the Chinese government and then public opinion. The U.S. government is completely different in terms of looking at risk mitigation globally around security issues, the South China Sea, Taiwan. And I think in particular, they're looking at national security issues, especially around like semiconductors and rare earth minerals in ways that might hurt our economy in the future if we have limited access to that stuff. And I just think it's the problem of the age that we try to boil everything down to simple terms and simple ideas. And it's not so simple when you're looking at it from different perspectives and in different ways.
Andy, I think you summed it up exactly correctly, that there's no question there is a deterioration, but it's largely in that G to G space, government to government. And the underlying business logic of U.S. And China trying to do business together, that doesn't change even if it's a cloudy day or a sunny day. It doesn't really matter. It's still a huge market, and U.S. companies still make fantastic products that Chinese consumers like. So there is a rebalancing. There are some changes going on. It's not it's that story we're talking about, and there's more. But I would say China remains China regardless of the political friction. You know what? There's an analogy. It's not a perfect analogy, but a lot of U.S. businesses built their strategy in Great Britain around their EU strategy. And that simplified customs, that simplified logistics, that simplified a lot of things, regulatory side and approval. Then Britain decides to pull out of the EU, which is certainly their decision, but it complicates business for American producers. That now it's a separate market, it's separate customs territory, it's separate regulatory environment, separate labeling, separate supply chain, separate inventory pool. And you say all of that just adds cost, and it is a form of decoupling, you could say, but it doesn't change the underlying attractiveness of Great Britain for American businesses. It's still a great market. So you still have to find a solution for your business in Britain, even if it's now a little more complicated and a little more expensive.
How when you're obviously you've lived in Asia for many years and you've worked in the U.S. government and in the private sector. How do we unravel these ill will and these bad relations? The one positive that I do see is we still have diplomatic channels open, and we're talking every day to Chinese counterparts and they to us, and there is friction, but I feel like we just haven't latched onto issues that have a common cause to both our countries. Maybe they're coming around on climate change, and I know President Biden is really pushing on that hard, and that's a big thing in terms of foreign policy.
Well, I'll give you some bad news on that point, and it's a very fair question. The bad news is this. There's now a sizable political constituency in each country that doesn't support improved relations, or there's a payoff, you could say, for friction.
Right.
That Donald Trump brought that front and center, that he looked like he was being a tough guy, or he looked like he was defending the United States, or he looked like he was pushing back on some of these economic issues by injecting friction. But China has the same dynamic, meaning Xi Jinping is going for his third term. It's a one-party system, but he has to be sensitive to leadership and what the Communist Party thinks and so forth. So the point is there's a payoff for being the tough guy. And you pay a price, so to speak, by offering concessions or trying to be flexible or trying to be friendly. So each side is somewhat painted into a corner. It was really striking to me that when Joe Biden comes in as president, running against the Trump legacy, he keeps all of Trump's tariffs intact. He doesn't change one. He could propose to China, we'll remove some of them. If you remove some of them, can we get a positive dynamic going? But he clearly didn't feel comfortable indicating that he could make some kind of concession or take a step toward China. He just didn't want to do that.
Well, there've been published reports, Frank, that the White House is considering maybe rolling back some of the consumer good tariffs, the 301 tariffs, while they pursue additional tariffs on some of that's made in China in 2025. The original stuff that I think Trump would have had a broader consensus of support for and more targeted and surgical tariffs on these key industries rather than the shotgun approach he came to. So I keep seeing that. My hope is that comes to fruition. But as we enter into 22, you're a political guy. Your history is super political. I find it really difficult to be the president of the United States during the midterm year where he's probably going to get crushed to be soft on China, quote unquote.
That's exactly the point. And now, unfortunately, for all of us, the payoff is greater in the U.S. by being the tough guy. And toughness is defined not as advancing U.S. interest, and toughness is not defined by getting some kind of result. Toughness is defined by friction. It's a little bit like evaluating your capabilities as driving a car by the amount of times you honk your horn. But if the payoff is we need more horn honking, well, then you're going to get a lot of horn honks. So that's what we've got going. By the way, China, if I may say, China has the exact same I remember talking to a friend, a mainland China friend, and he was being a little critical of us. He was saying his point was, boy, Trump is this tough guy and Biden's coming in, and we thought we'd see an opportunity for improved relationship, and Biden's really done nothing to improve, which in some respects is a fair comment. But my comment to him was, well, guess what, fellas? You guys missed the opportunity as well. You had several months between Biden's election and he took office, and you could have shown something or did some soft moves and shown a little bit of positive, but you obviously don't have the capability in your system to be flexible either. And I understand you can't be responding to U.S. demands or else you look weak, but there are ways you could have phrased this as a concession in the WTO system, or you could have made an announcement in Brussels. But if the U.S. was a beneficiary of it, it certainly would have sent a positive tone. So you kind of didn't make good use of this transition in the U.S. to cultivate any goodwill.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, yeah, to your point, it's my concern really is what the world looks like is pre-World War I, where nationalism starts to rise. You start to have interlocking alliances. Obviously, if you look at the U.S., we could have been in a far better shape with TPP because of the economic growth and security that would have had, but we still have a lot of alliances. China is interesting because they don't have the same pull that we've had since post-World War II. They've really used economic interdependence to try to make people reliant upon them and their supply chains and infrastructure. But it does. It just feels like this. The problem with nationalism is like a QAnon supporter. Once you start going down that path, it's really hard to pull yourself out of self-radicalization of your feelings and the way you're going. And that's the concern. Is like, where are the exit ramps? Where's the brakes where we can all just take a breath?
Yeah. Andy, I'm sad to say that I basically agree with your thesis that nationalism is you're injecting passion and you're injecting emotion and you are mounting a tiger, and it's very, very hard to dismount once you've mounted it. And because it's a cheap or an easy political thrust, and your opponent can do it as well, you've got to sort of do a little of it just to keep in the game. Yeah. So it's very, very tough to be the good guy here, and it's very easy to be the bad cop. Unfortunately, that's kind of where we are right now.
If that's the situation, then I think the concern for a lot of businesses is how do I recalculate my risk tolerance, right? Because for sourcing for footwear, it's not as easy as just moving down the street like it is apparel or something else, right? Like how do you recalculate your risk?
I'll make two comments. And I worked with I was with Citibank and I was with Bank of America in Asia, so we dealt with this. That every company's different, but I'll just make two general points about risk and exposure. One, regardless of the politics of the moment, I think COVID and supply chain reminds us of concentration risk. Just be careful about saying there's one single source supplier for my product that's really the best on this planet. So therefore, I will put 100% of my sourcing in that one supplier. That's a mistake, I think, at the corporate level. It's also a mistake at the country level. So I think you want to have multiple suppliers, multiple individual companies, and you also want to have multiple geographical locales. But that's a little bit of insurance policy. Even if you say, boy, if I put some of this product sourcing elsewhere, it might be a little more expensive, or there might be more management issues and so forth. But it's probably worth. That's just an insurance policy to my mind. So pay attention to sourcing. I think Nike led on this, and I think Nike promulgated they would not source more than 50% of their product from any one country. So that strikes me as a wise move. So one point is concentration risk. The other point I'd make is capital expenditure and CapEx, meaning capital expenditure is usually long-dated products. Usually if you're buying a warehouse or building a warehouse or a fleet of trucks, you're saying, look, this really makes a lot of sense, but it only starts making sense in year 3 or year 4, and then we really make money. If it's a 10-year project, we'll really make money if we buy that. I would say be careful of that kind of capital exposure in markets where there might be volatility. You might be better off leasing and renting and subbing out and contracting and doing a joint venture. So whenever there's a risk factor, you look at ways of reducing your capital exposure, because then you've got long-dated debt and you might be in a volatile situation. That's just a commercial point. That's not a political point, but I would encourage people to talk to their banker about that. What kind of investment would they normally make in that market, and what kind of investment are they going to make now, and what alternatives are there to making that kind of investment?
Another commercial point I want to ask you about, Frank, is the landscape, the retail landscape, the consumer landscape in China for our brands, for American brands and global shoe brands. There seems to be this ongoing concern about China's ability at the government level to stir up the nationalistic fervor against Western brands. Talk to us about how big of a threat that actually is, whether or not that's organic or does it really matter? How do brands kind of balance the...
Well, I'd say a few things here. First of all, it is definitely a possibility. They definitely can do it, and they have done it in the past. They were unhappy with South Korea when South Korea deployed a U.S. weapon system, a defensive system, and they boycotted the South Korean department store chain in China. They've done it with Japan at various trade frictions. They've done this in the past where it's kind of public, to my mind kind of ugly. But they have not done it even at the worst moments of the Trump administration's trade policy, where there's a fair amount of friction, a fair amount of ill will. They never called for a boycott of American goods. They never made it a public issue or a political issue. So I took heart from them. By the way, I think that was very wise of them, because they would just be encouraging America to react in kind. So the point is, we've seen American firms just boom in China over these last 4 years. So it's Procter & Gamble's best year ever. It's Starbucks in China. It's Starbucks' best year ever in China. It's Kentucky Fried Chicken best year ever in China. And the other European brands as well, like Kia, Mercedes-Benz, and so forth. It's really been a good time. So I'm not as concerned about a public call for a boycott, but I would say think about your national identity as a marketing device, and think about where that might help you. And it certainly can help you in some respects. We think of French wine or Australian wine or French perfume or German auto parts. So sometimes national identity is really part of your commercial projection. Right. Sometimes it might be a negative, but I've not seen it. But if you look at imagery, say for Levi's in China, it might not explicitly or in a loud way say, made in the USA, but the sceneries and the photographs and the videos and the imagery is all Western United States. So it's pretty clear that you're buying part of American history with that. So, but I think brands need to have that kind of that's more of an advertising agency question about what does our brand stand for? What does it mean? How do we project what people respect and admire about the United States? But we don't want to get tangled into any politics.
Well, let me ask you that
question. Every brand
that tangled politic point, because in the U.S., right, Senator Rubio sent a letter, I believe, around the Georgia voting law when that came out, and Coca-Cola, United Airlines, and others came out against it, and he was kind of pointing to the hypocrisy very publicly of these American corporations that are coming out against U.S. law of various kinds, while at the same time selling into China. How do you advise, if you're advising an American company to navigate that?
Yeah, but here's my comment. This is back to Matt, when you and I were at the Commerce Department day, because this comes up in every in all sorts of markets. This comes up in Saudi Arabia. How can you How can you do business in Saudi Arabia if they don't let women drive cars? Well, now they let women drive cars, but still women are restricted in a lot of areas of society. But a lot of countries have different social organizational limitations that we might view as a human rights violation. And where do you draw the lines as a company? I would say this is the key to my mind of companies performing around the world. I would say in general, U.S. companies are part of the solution, not part of the problem, because U.S. companies behave in a way and treat people in a way that is world best, world class, that there's a way to complain about how you're treated. There's an 800 number. There's training against sexual harassment, that all of these company leadership know they've got to treat people from different backgrounds or minority backgrounds with dignity and with respect and give people chances. They come from unconventional backgrounds, unconventional lifestyles, and so forth. So the American companies, I think, set a great benchmark of behavior. The one question I have for that American company is, do you adhere to those same norms that you do in your home market in the back of the U.S. where you built all that out? Do you adhere to that overseas? If you can do that, you are definitely part of the solution. You're not part of the problem, because you're providing a better corporate environment through your presence in that market than you are by staying out of that market. So I would encourage companies to get going, to get overseas, to sell into markets and be part of that solution. There's a friend say there's nothing more subversive in China than a U.S. company coming into the market. So go be part of the solution.
I think there's another thing too that we could talk about, but it's like crisis management. When something does come up, or there's boycotts, or there's issues, or whatever's happening. I think some corporations are really good at this, but some are not. And obviously you can't you try to scenario plan as best you can, but you never know what's going to light a fuse even in the U.S. somewhere, much less China. So these rising nationalisms at a country level are also happening in communities. These rising tensions are flaring up here and there, and consumers or individuals feel like they have more autonomy and a more ability to speak out and speak their truth on social media, but also out in the streets and all these things. And I would just say, when you're thinking about all this stuff, it's not just what's happening in China, it's happening everywhere. And I think some corporations aren't queuing into the fact that they need to start creating a structure, maybe not a scenario here, but a structure where it's like, who is going to be in charge when it hits the fan, and who's our crisis communicator, who's our legal crisis person, and who do we get in the room to make these decisions really quickly? Because the problem is, corporations typically are so far behind. If something's already happened, and then a week later they come out with a press release, right? Because they're so calculated. But how do they get quicker at identifying and moving on these different things? I think that's.
I think that's very sound analysis, Andy. And I'd say this: look, all of corporate America or corporates around the world, we're behaving in front of an audience. And that audience might historically just been sort of our consumers and our suppliers. And now there's stakeholders, right. Now there's interest groups, now there's media, and now there's different communities that might see something or not like something. And given that we're in a communications era, the rise of social media, anybody's ability to make a point about your brand, your product, your company is sort of open-ended. So whatever, you might have had your game up 10 years ago, but it's a different world in just 10 years about how you communicate. And I'd also say you made some very good points on a defensive strategy, have a system and structure in place. I'd say have an offensive strategy. What is your corporate culture, and how do you communicate that? What do you do in your community? And again, 10 or 20 years ago as well, we take high school kids on tours of the factory, and we have a summer internship program. All that's good stuff. But I'd say, boy, I would look at doing more than just that. I would look at having some kind of signature activity that allows the community to connect with you and feel good about you. And again, in your hometown where you've been producing product for 100 years, everybody does kind of know you. So you're not fighting that battle in the same way. But in a new market where you've been in there for 5 years, nobody knows you and their ability to believe something bad. So think about, on a smaller scale perhaps, but think about in a new market having the same set of activities or some kind of activity that allows people to understand you and what you're doing. And I would start with the same way. I'd start with the internship program and taking college kids and saying we're going to take some kids for our marketing department and we're going to do some other kind of things. But I'd say, you're a good corporate citizen. You're doing the same things overseas you do back home.
So I have 3 quick hits I want to ask you about, Frank, before we close it out.
Okay.
And so let's imagine in an alternative universe, the Biden White House has invited you in to advise them on 3 really important topics. And I want, I don't know if you can do it, like quick hit answers. What on earth do you do about forced labor in Uyghurs, Hong Kong, and then Taiwan, as if China is going to invade? Like, what are those 3 quick hits?
Here's the category error. So just here's the category error on that question, if I may, with all respect.
Sure.
Which is, if you're trying to induce better behavior on a sticky subject in China, don't put all your eggs in the China basket. Don't focus all of your argumentation, your effort, your friction, your messaging to China. And indeed, I give the Biden administration credit, because on the political military side, they've done a very good job of saying we're concerned about what China is doing in the geopolitical space. So what we're going to do is reinvigorate the Quad. We're going to get that going. What we're going to do is get AUKUS going and work with Australia on a treaty basis and Britain on their submarine procurement program. So we're going to get that going. Those 2 steps are very helpful for political stability. On trade, the point is on trade, if you're unhappy with behavior in China, the single best step we can take is to do something in Southeast Asia. TPP, a digital initiative, anything else going. And by the way, I'll tell you something else. If you're concerned about China's behavior, get a U.S.-EU free trade agreement going, right? And that is a very strong statement to say the world norms are in one direction. U.S. and Europe are proud proponents of global norms, and some other countries are outliers, right? And so the point is, make them pay a price, so to speak. It's an indirect price, but make them pay a price for being an outlier, right? Right now, it's cost-free. Their behavior is cost-free. And the one thing you don't want to do if you're trying to attach a cost to bad behavior is you don't want to attach a cost that is symmetrical, that each party pays the cost, which is what tariffs do. You only want to attach cost that is asymmetrical so that the target pays the price for it and we don't find ourselves disrupted. So that means lower tariffs with other trading partners. Don't work on raising tariffs with China.
Like it.
Wow. I think that's dead on. And we've talked about how TPP was the single rebalancing, right? It's the way that you rebalance is you form alliances outside, you strengthen those alliances, you strengthen the economies so that they don't have to be so reliant on China themselves, and that security then pays for itself.
I'll reference something else for you guys, if I may. I know we might be going long. Maybe this gets cut, but if we can close on the restaurant problem, and I'll send you a link to the essay. And the restaurant problem is this. You're in charge of running 4 or 5 restaurants in a city. And so you're in charge of 5 restaurants. 4 of them are break even, are turning a profit. 1 of them's not. What do you do? What's your job as restaurant manager for these 4 or 5 restaurants? The point is, per our previous discussion, the point is the wrong answer is to say, I'm going to focus all of my energy and resources trying to get that unprofitable profitable. Maybe that makes sense, but it probably makes sense to put your money on the fast pony, so to speak. If your goal is overall profitability or overall revenue or overall employment, you probably ought to put your emphasis on the best performing restaurants and not say my mission on this planet is to find the unprofitable restaurant and turn it around, right? My mission on this planet is how fast can we run? How far can we go, right? But that's so it's seductive because negativity has a hold on our imagination, has a hold on our decision making. So if you say in this room, and we call planet Earth one room, there's somebody here I really have trouble with, I'm going to go to that guy and I'm going to spend the next 4 years of my presidency telling this guy why he's giving me trouble. Then he needs to stop. And you say, really, I don't know how much sense that makes. Why don't you talk to the other 99 people in this room and see what you can do with them and how far you can go with them? That is the restaurant problem. We can put a link to that if it's okay.
Yeah, of course.
As well.
Wow. I love it. I love that analogy.
There's another restaurant problem here with just workers. The last time Matt and I had lunch, we had to order from an app, and somebody brought it over. We can solve that problem too. Who knows? And it was right next to a college campus. You would think the college kids would be taking the jobs, but even the college kids don't want the jobs.
Nope.
Yeah, that's funny. Oh, that's funny.
Frank, we really appreciate you coming on today and chatting about what's happening and thinking about things more strategically, I think, as we look forward.
Thanks so much, Andy. Matt, it's great to see you guys again. Great to catch up. Always a lot of fun to chat China, and thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Folks, again, this is the Shoe and Show. You can find us at shoeandshow.com. You can see all the episodes, nearly, or at this point, over 300 episodes now. Going every episode, even with COVID and all the changes that are happening, every single episode, I think you can find some real great insights from executives and leaders and experts out there that can help your business. That's really why we do the podcast, helping sharpen your skills, sharpen your strategy to execute better. If you ever need anything from FDRA, drop us a line, info@fdra.org. And of course, for all our members, every single Tuesday at 2 p.m., we talk about these issues and we try to help you stay ahead of the game so you see challenges before it emerges, and help provide a common platform where we bring companies together to talk about these issues so that no one's blindsided, but also find real solutions through common collective action. So again, thank you for allowing us to serve as your footwear industry's representatives in Washington and around the world on many of these issues. Please stay close to us as things keep changing. They change daily and hourly, with the relationship with trade issues, with everything that's happening. But on behalf of Matt and myself and our whole team at FDRA, thanks so much. Hope everybody's having a happy holiday season, healthy holiday season, and a season of sales. Until next time, Shoe In is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org